My name is Wyatt Dalton, and the last word my father ever said to me was go. I was 11. I stood on the gravel with a duffel bag while my aunt's headlights swept across the yard and he would not turn around. For 20 years, I believed that man threw me away like a feed sack gone sour. So I built a whole life on it. 3 states away, careful never to need a single soul. Then last August, halfway through my first vacation in 9 years, my phone lit up on a beach towel. Fly home. Don't say anything to your parents. I almost laughed because my parents had not been parents since I was a child. But the next message used 2 names and the bottom dropped out of my stomach. I flew home that night. At the airport, a lawyer and 2 officers were waiting at my gate, and what they told me put me flat on the floor. The cruelest thing my father ever did turned out to be the kindest. And what my mother did next is the part I still cannot say without my hands shaking. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quietest people in the family turn out to be the ones holding everything. If you have ever been handed a story about yourself you never got to correct, stay with me, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up because you should know who you are riding with. I am 31. I am a large animal vet outside Bozeman, Montana, which means most of my work happens at 3 in the morning in somebody's frozen barn. The night before all this started, I had my arm inside a steer named Barnaby, turning a calf that had decided to come sideways. The rancher was crying. His wife was praying. I was the only calm person in a 40-mile radius, and that is usually how it goes. People do not call me because they like me. They call me because the worst thing has already happened, and they need somebody who will not flinch. I am good at that. I am good at being the steady hands in the worst hour of a stranger's life. The calf came out slick and breathing, and the rancher hugged me, and I let him for exactly 2 seconds before I started cleaning my gear. That is the thing nobody warns you about being raised the way I was. You learn to be needed like a tool. You never quite learn to be wanted like a person. I had a paid-off truck, a good practice, and a kitchen with 1 chair. My Aunt Ruth used to say, I collected reasons to skip Thanksgiving the way other women collect recipes. She was not wrong. I had spent 2 decades proving I did not require anybody, least of all the family that had mailed me away at 11 and never written back. And I would have kept proving it forever if Ruth had not booked us both a beach house in July and refused to let me weasel out of it. The Outer Banks in summer is loud in the good way. Ruth's grown kids were there, my cousins, with their own kids underfoot, and a screen porch that smelled like sunscreen and steamed shrimp. These people were not my blood exactly. Ruth was my father's younger sister, and when Glenn sent me to her at 11, she could have treated me like a charity case. Instead, she taught me to drive a tractor, signed my report cards, and sat in the front row when I crossed the stage for my doctorate. Her family became the only family that ever felt like one. On the 3rd evening, one of the little ones asked me, all innocent, when I was going to take her to see the famous Nebraska farm, the one with the red barn from the old photo on Ruth's wall. The porch went a half-beat quiet. Ruth sat down her tea. She got a look I had seen maybe twice in 20 years, a tightness around the eyes like a woman bracing a door against weather. Don't fill the child's head with that place, she said too quick, and changed the subject to the fireworks. I let it go. I was good at letting things go, but I caught her watching me later while I dried dishes. The way you watch somebody you are afraid is about to find something out. I told myself it was nothing. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out to the dunes to watch the dark come in over the water. My phone buzzed against my hip. I figured it was the answering service, another barn, another worse night of somebody's life. It was a number I did not know, and a message that would burn the whole quiet life I had built right down to the studs. Fly home. Don't say anything to your parents. I read it 3 times, and the wind came off the water, carrying the smell of cut grass from somebody's lawn behind the dunes, and just like that I was 11 again. Funny how a smell does that. Back home it was alfalfa, and the night they sent me away the whole place reeked of it. Fresh mown and sweet under a sky going purple. I had come downstairs for water, and found my mother and her brother Roy at the kitchen table with bank statements fanned out like a card game. My grandmother Nadine's statements. I would understand much later. Roy looked up and saw me in the doorway, and his face did something cold. He leaned toward my father, who had just come in from the field, and he said, "Look, The girl saw. My father went the color of dishwater. Nobody explained anything to an 11-year-old. By morning, my bag was packed. My mother stood on the porch with her arms crossed while Ruth's headlights came up the lane. And when I asked her why I had to go, she said the words I would carry for 2 decades. He didn't want you, Willa. Nobody did. My father wore his work flannel, the green and black one, and he stood with his back to me by the truck and would not turn his head. Not when I called his name, not when I cried, not even when the screen door behind him slammed so hard the whole porch shook. Go, was all he said. So I went for 20 years. I believed every word my mother gave me because an 11-year-old believes her mother, and because nobody, not one soul, ever called to tell me different. And now, standing in the salt wind with my phone in my hand, somebody finally was. I am not a woman who jumps because a stranger says jump. The first thing I did was try to figure out who was on the other end of that number. I called it straight to a generic voicemail, no name. I ran it through a reverse lookup on my phone and got a regional area code for eastern Nebraska and nothing else. I sat down on the cold sand and thought it through like a diagnosis. Somebody knew my cell number, knew I was traveling, and knew the word parents would mean something to me. That was not a wrong number. That was somebody who had done homework. I texted back, "Who's this?" The reply came fast. "It's about your father. Your mother and Roy cannot know you are coming." Reading Roy's name in a text from a stranger did something to the back of my neck that 20 years of therapy had not undone. This was not a prank. Pranksters do not know about Roy. I stood up and brushed off the sand. Inside, the porch was still laughing over a card game, and Ruth caught my eye through the screen, and her face changed when she saw mine. I did not tell her. The message had said, "Don't say anything." And some old instinct, older than my good sense, told me to honor that for one more night until I understood the shape of it. I booked the red-eye out of Norfolk to Omaha on my phone right there in the dark. I do not run from things. I never have. Whatever was waiting in Nebraska had been waiting 20 years, and I was done letting other people decide what I got to know about my own life. On the plane, I did the math on what these people thought of me because I had a layover and nothing but time. Here is the story. The town of Calhoun, Nebraska, had been told about Wyatt Dalton, that I was a difficult child, that I lied, that I took things, that poor Glenn and Brenda had tried everything and finally had to ship the girl off to relatives for the family's own peace. I knew the story because I had gone back once at 19 and stood in the feed store and watched grown adults change aisles to avoid me. I did not waste my breath arguing that day. I had learned young that you cannot argue a person out of a conclusion they reached because it was comfortable. So I made a different choice. I stopped trying to win people who had already decided. And I got very, very good at one thing they could never take from me. I put myself through school. I built a name in 3 counties for steady hands and an honest bill. Let the town keep its story. I had a better one written in my own ink. What I did not know, sipping bad airport coffee at 2 a.m, was what was actually at stake back there. The Dalton place was 400 acres of bottomland that had been in the family since 1911. My grandmother, Nadine, had held the purse strings until she passed 3 years ago, and I had not even been told she died. Somewhere out there was a will and a barn and a whole accounting of who got what, and somebody with 2 police officers thought I needed to know about it badly enough to fly me across the country in the dark. I will be honest with you because that is the deal between us. A part of me did not fully trust the stranger with the area code, so before I let anybody steer me, I tested it myself. From the Omaha gate at 6 o'clock in the morning, I dialed the old farmhouse number, the one I had memorized as a child and never once used since. It rang 4 times. Then a recording, and the voice on it was my mother's, older and flatter than I remembered, telling me to leave a message for Brenda and Roy at the Dalton residence. Roy living in my grandmother's house. That told me more than the stranger had. I hung up before the beep. If my mother and uncle were running that place together and somebody official wanted me there without them knowing, then the warning was not paranoia. It was a map. I had spent my whole adult life reading situations for the danger nobody else wanted to name. A steer about to kick, a rancher about to lose everything. I knew the feel of a thing that was about to go very wrong. and this had that feel all the way down. So, I squared my shoulders and walked toward baggage claim, where a man in a gray suit was holding a folder against his chest and scanning faces, and 2 officers stood a polite distance behind him. He found me. He knew me on sight, which meant he had a photo, which meant this had been planned. "Miss Dalton," he said, and his voice was kind in the careful way doctors use. "I am sorry to do this to you here. I had flown 2,000 miles on a stranger's text. I was not about to spend 1 more hour not knowing. His name was Tom Beck. He had been my father's attorney for 19 years, he said, though I had never heard his name in my life." The 2 behind him were investigators with the county attorney's office, and he introduced them so plainly that the word investigators did not register for a second. We sat in a glass-in airline office somebody had unlocked for us, the kind with a fake plant and a clock that ticked too loud. Tom Beck set his folder on the table and folded his hands on top of it like a man about to give a sermon he had rehearsed and still dreaded. "Before I say the rest," he told me, "I need you to hear one thing clearly. Your father did not throw you out, Willa." I sat very still. 20 years is a long time to hold a sentence in your chest, and what he had just said went straight under all of it. I asked him what he meant, and I kept my voice level, because keeping my voice level is the only religion I have ever really practiced. He opened the folder. On top was a single envelope, cream-colored, soft at the corners from being handled. Across the front, in handwriting I had not seen since I was a girl, but knew the way you know your own heartbeat, was my name, my Willa, my father's hand. The pen pressed so hard in places it had nearly torn the paper the way he wrote everything, like the words might get away from him if he did not pin them down. Tom Beck slid it an inch toward me across the table. I did not pick it up. The clock ticked. One of the investigators shifted her weight, and Tom Beck said the next thing gently, the way you would set down something that might break, and the room tilted sideways and the floor came up to meet me. What he said was this: "Your father passed 6 days ago. He left everything to you, and 20 years ago he sent you away to keep you safe." I got about as far as the word safe. I have delivered hard news to grieving people in barns and kitchens my whole career, and I have never once been the one to go down. I went down, not dramatically. My knees just stopped being mine, and the gray carpet swung up, and the world went to a white roar for a few seconds. I want to be clear about why, because it matters. I did not faint from weakness. I had flown all night on an empty stomach and 2 coffees, and a stranger had just told me that the father I had spent 20 years hating had loved me the entire time and was now in the ground where I could never reach him. That is not weakness. That is grief arriving all at once with nowhere to put itself. When I came up, the female investigator was crouched beside me with a paper cup of water, saying my name, and Tom Beck looked stricken. I pushed the cup away and got my back against the wall and sat up under my own power. First time in my life, I told them, and my voice came out rough, but mine. My patience would never let me hear the end of it. Nobody laughed, which was fair. I breathed until the room held still. Then I did the only thing I know how to do when everything is falling apart, which is reach for the next true fact I can stand on. I did not want the water, and I did not want to be handled. "I'll be all right," I said. "What I need is the file. Show me. Start at the beginning and do not soften any of it. I have had 20 years of soft. I am ready for the truth." Tom Beck poured himself some of the water I had refused and decoded the message that had flown me home. The text was his, sent from a burner he had bought for exactly this. The warning about my parents was not poetry. My mother Brenda and my uncle Roy were the subjects of an open investigation, and if either of them learned I was in the state before the right pieces were in place, the careful thing my father had built over 20 years could come apart in an afternoon. They could move money. They could pressure people. "Roy," he said, choosing the word, "has a history of making people reconsider their statements." The investigators did not contradict him. I asked the obvious thing. An investigation into what? Tom Beck looked at the 2 officers, and the woman whose name was Detective Pruitt took it from there. "Financial exploitation of an elder," she said. "Your grandmother, Nadine Dalton." I felt the floor try to tilt again, and I planted both feet and would not let it. Nadine had been the one warm grown-up of my early childhood, the one who slipped me peppermints in church and let me name the barn cats. They drained her, Wyatt said plainly. Over years, powers of attorney, accounts, signatures. We have had a piece of it for a long time. We have not had all of it. I looked at the folder, then at the envelope with my name in my father's desperate hand, and something in me that had been curled up tight for 20 years started, very slowly, to stand. I did not cry. There would be time for that later and not in front of strangers. Keep going, I said. You said my father knew. How long had he known? And Detective Wyatt and Tom Beck traded a look that told me I was not going to like the answer. Tom Beck spread the documents across the table, and I read them the way I read a chart, top to bottom, looking for the thing that does not fit. Withdrawals from Nadine's accounts going back 11 years. A power of attorney she had signed when her eyesight was failing, with Roy as agent and my mother as successor. Transfers, even amounts, the kind designed not to trip a bank's attention. $200,000 gone in pieces into accounts that fed my mother and her brother. I have a clinical mind. It is the only thing that let me stay upright. But somewhere in the third page, my own memory snagged on a line and would not let go. A single large withdrawal, $12,000, dated the 18th of June, the summer I was 11. I knew that date in my body. Detective Wyatt, I said, the 18th of June. That was my grandmother's birthday. We were all at that house that night. I came downstairs and I saw my mother and Roy at the kitchen table with her bank papers. And Roy said, "Look, the girl saw." And the next morning, I was gone. Wyatt went very still. She pulled the page closer. "You have had this bank record for how long?" I asked. "About a year," she admitted. "You had the number and the date. You did not have the only person who was standing in that kitchen." For the first time, the two of them looked at me not as a grieving daughter to be managed, but as something useful, a witness, the withdrawal they could prove. What I could prove was the why and the when, and the fact that an 11-year-old's accidental glimpse was the exact thing that got her shipped 3 states away. Tom Beck closed his eyes a moment. "Your father knew," he said quietly. "He knew before you were 11. He just could not prove it yet. And he could not protect you and fight them at the same time. I want to tell you I melted into a daughter's gratitude right there. I did not. I got angry. The clean, useful anger I trust more than tears. If he knew," I said, "then explain something to me. He knew I was in danger from his own wife. So he handed me to Ruth and went radio silent for 20 years. No letters, no birthday calls. He let me grow up certain he didn't want me. So which was it? Was I his daughter, or was I just a problem he filed away 3 states out of sight so it wouldn't mess up whatever long game he was playing?" The investigators looked at the table. Tom Beck did not. He had clearly been waiting for this exact question, which annoyed me the way it annoys you when somebody knows you better than they have any right to. "Your father told me you would ask that," he said. He said word for word almost. He said Willa is too smart to be bought with a sad story, so don't try. There is a letter. He wrote it over many years and finished it this spring when his heart started giving out and he knew he was close. He left strict instructions. You were not to receive it or any of it until he was gone, and the pieces were in place to keep you safe. Not one day sooner, he said. And Tom Beck's voice caught for just a second. He said, "If I let her open it while I am alive, I will lose my nerve and ruin 20 years of work, because the second I see my girl's face, I will tell her everything and damn the consequences." I sat there with my jaw tight. I did not trust a dead man's words yet, but I wanted to read them more than I have wanted anything in a long time. Ruth was already driving to Omaha. That was the part that gutted me. She had been on a flight an hour behind mine because Tom Beck had called her the moment I texted back, and she had not said one word to me on that beach porch. When she walked into the airline office, 60 years old and gray and shaking, I stood up so fast my chair scraped. "You knew," I said. It was not a question. She did not look away. I will give her that. "I knew," she said. Your father came to me the week before he put you in my car, and he told me what Brenda and Roy were doing, and he made me swear on our own mother that I would never tell you the real reason. He said if you knew, you would come back to fix it the way you fix everything, and that they would hurt you to keep you quiet. He said the only way to keep you safe was to make sure you wanted nothing to do with this place. He tried once, she said before her voice dropped. That first Christmas, he couldn't stand it, and he gave me a card to mail you, just his name inside, nothing else. 2 weeks later, Roy stopped Glenn by the grain bins and said, "Real friendly," that it was a shame about the girl all the way out at Ruth's place. He used your name. Your father had told no living soul where you were but me. After that, he never sent another word because now he knew for certain they were watching my mailbox and yours. That was when I understood it, too. So I let you believe a lie for 20 years, Willa, and I have hated myself for every single one of them. She set a box on the table between us, a plain banker's box taped at the seams. On top of it, folded, was the green and black work flannel my father had worn the last morning I saw him. I had not seen that jacket in 20 years, and I would have known it in the dark. He wanted you to have the box, Ruth said. He told me, when she opens it, make her be alone because she is going to need to be the only one in the room. I put my hand flat on the flannel. It still smelled faintly, impossibly of him. I took the box to a motel by the interstate and locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against the bed, the way I had sat as a kid when the world got too big. Inside were 2 things, a binder thick and the cream envelope with my name. I opened the envelope first. The letter ran 12 pages, dated across years like a logbook. My father's hard pen softening and shaking toward the end. He wrote about the night I came downstairs. He wrote that Roy had threatened, in plain words, to make sure the girl forgets what she thinks she saw, and that he had looked at his 11-year-old daughter and understood he could not both protect me and gather the proof to stop them. So, he chose. He sent me out of their reach and spent the next 20 years quietly building the case I could not have helped him build. Near the bottom of the first page was a line I have read so many times I could recite it in my sleep. I had to let you hate me to keep you alive. The binder was the proof, not a diary, not some secret recording. Real paper, the kind that holds up. Certified bank statements he had subpoenaed through a guardianship petition. A copy of a transfer on death deed on the 400 acres signed and recorded at the county courthouse in 2019, naming me. Correspondence with Detective Puett's office going back 2 years. A revocable trust holding what was left of Nadine's money with my name on it. My father had not loved me out loud. He had loved me in filings, in recordings of deeds, in 20 years of letting me be furious so that I would be far away and breathing. I sat on that motel floor and cried the way you cry once a decade. If you have ever lost years with someone because of a lie that somebody else told, comment the word home below. I read every one of them. And if this channel is doing right by you, hit subscribe, because the part that comes next is the reason I needed you to hear all of this first. I read the whole letter twice that night. The second time, the night I was 11, rearranged itself in front of me, every piece sliding into a new shape. The bank papers on the table had been Nadine's, and I had walked into the middle of a theft. Roy's cold face, the words, "Look, the girl saw." My father coming in from the field still smelling of alfalfa, going gray when he understood that his child had become a loose end in his brother-in-law's eyes. He had a choice no parent should have to make between keeping me close and keeping me safe. And he made the one that cost him everything he wanted and gave me everything I needed. He could not look at me by the truck because if he had looked at me, the letter said he would not have been able to do it. He would have pulled me back inside and held the line right there, and they would have come for us both. So he kept his back turned and let the screen door slam and said the one word he could get out without breaking. Go. For 20 years, I had heard that word as a rejection. Now I heard it as the hardest act of love a tired man ever managed. The letter answered the questions I had been throwing at Tom Beck, the ones any sane person would ask. Why no secret calls? Why no letters slipped through Ruth? My father had thought through every door and written down why each one was closed. Roy still went through Nadine's mail and watched the family like a hawk watches a fence row. One card from Glenn to a daughter he was supposed to have disowned would have told them the witness still mattered to him, and they would have come looking for me to make sure I stayed quiet. A real estrangement was the only kind that held up under that kind of watching because it was not an act. And I understood, reading it twice, what Roy had actually wanted all those years, because it was the same thing every careful thief wants, not to chase me down. A vanished girl brings deputies and questions, and a hurt one brings worse. And the last thing two people skimming an old woman's accounts could afford was anybody asking where the granddaughter went. Roy needed me gone and silent, nothing more. And for 20 years, I obligingly was both. The danger was never a hunt. It was a door. And it only swung open if I came back or learned the truth or opened my mouth. His friendly little word by the grain bins had not been a slip. It had been the whole message. We know where she is. Keep her gone and she stays fine. My father heard it for exactly what it was. And he kept me behind that door for 2 decades. The law was the same trap. He could not move against his own wife and her brother while they held Nadine's power of attorney without tipping them to shred the records and bury the money. He needed the bank's own pattern to ripen into proof. He needed Nadine gone before the estate would even open. So he waited and documented and recorded the deed, the first quiet minute he safely could in 2019, and let me hate him the whole time because a daughter who hates you does not come home and walk into a trap. It did not fix the grief. Nothing fixes the grief of finding out a person loved you only after they are too far gone to tell. But it turned the anger toward the people who had earned it. My mother, who had stood on that porch and looked her crying daughter in the eye and chosen the cruelest possible lie. Her brother, who had made my own father afraid for my life. They were 40 miles south of that motel, sleeping in my grandmother's house, counting an inheritance they believed was theirs. They had no idea I had come home. In the morning, I met Tom Beck at his office in town, and he laid out where things stood. My father's funeral had been small and fast, the way Brenda wanted it, before anyone could ask questions. The reading of the will was set for Friday at the farmhouse, 3 days out. My mother had insisted on the house in front of family and the pastor and a couple of longtime neighbors because Brenda Dalton never met an audience she did not want to perform her grief for. She believed she was inheriting 400 acres and whatever Nadine had left, and she had already had a lawyer of her own draft paperwork to that effect. Tom Beck slid a fresh document across his desk. 2 weeks before your father died, he said, your mother had him sign what she told the notary was a renewal of a farm lease. It was actually a quitclaim deed, transferring the land to her. I felt my pulse pick up and I made it slow back down. Did it work? I asked. He almost smiled. No. He said, you cannot give away what you do, not own anymore. Your father recorded that transfer on death deed to you back in 2019. A recorded deed like that controls the land at death. No matter what a later piece of paper says, and no matter what is in any will, she tried to steal a farm he had already given away. She just does not know it yet. I sat with that. I could have stayed in Montana and let the lawyers handle it by mail and never set foot in that house again. That would have been the safe choice. And the small one. I am not built for small. Put me on the list for Friday, I said. I want to be in that room. Let her think I am there to cry. I did not wait for Friday to lay eyes on them. I drove out to the farm Wednesday afternoon down the county road I had not traveled since I was 19, and the fields were in second cutting alfalfa. That same sweet green smell rolling through the truck windows and straight into the oldest part of me. The house looked smaller and meaner than my memory. My mother came out onto the porch before I was out of the truck, and 20 years fell away in the worst way. She had aged into a hard, handsome woman who held her grief like a prop. Brenda Dalton in black, dabbing at dry eyes. Well, she said, look what the wind blew in. Roy came to the door behind her, heavier, grayer, the same flat eyes. Travis was there, too, my half-brother, 27 now, a man I had never really known, raised entirely on the story that I was the bad. He leaned closer, the smell of cheap tobacco and cold sweat hanging off him like a bad omen. You think you're smart, don't you? Coming back here, poking around with your big city vet degrees. But people who come back to the Dalton farm don't usually leave with anything more than they brought. I looked right into those flat, gray eyes. The exact same eyes that had looked at me 20 years ago when he told my father the girl saw. For the first time in my life, I didn't back up an inch. I didn't let my hands shake. I just stared at him until the smirk on his face started to twitch and flatten out. "My name is Wyatt Dalton," I said, my voice dropping into that low, steady register I used when a steer was about to kick and I needed to keep my ground. "And you picked the wrong generation to mess with." He stiffened, taken aback by a quietness he didn't know how to handle. I turned my back on him, walked right past the old implement shed, and got into my truck without looking back once. Friday morning, the front room of the old farmhouse smelled like stale coffee and floral arrangements from the local church. Brenda Dalton sat at the head of the dining table in her heavy black dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the part of the grieving widow to a room full of nodding neighbors and the local pastor. Travis sat nervously near the back, his fingers drumming a quiet, erratic beat against his knee. When I walked through the screen door, the whole room went dead quiet. Brenda didn't even try to hide her irritation. She flashed that cold, sharp look she used to reserve for broken fence posts and muddy boots. "Well," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I see the stray finally found its way home for the scraps." I didn't say a word. I just pulled out a chair near the corner, sat down, and crossed my ankles, keeping my face as flat and smooth as river glass. Tom Beck walked in right behind me, carrying his worn leather briefcase. He didn't offer any pleasantries. He just set his folders down on the table, nodded to the pastor, and unclipped his pen with a sharp, metallic click that cut through the silence. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Glenn Dalton," Tom announced, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Brenda straightened up in her chair, a smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth while she cast a quick glance at Roy standing by the pantry door. Tom started reading through the standard provisions. Small bequests to the church, a modest sum for Travis, and finally, the disposition of the main estate. Brenda leaned forward, her eyes bright with triumph, waiting for the words that would hand her the 400 acres. As for the Dalton farm property and the acreage comprising the homestead, Tom read, pausing just long enough to let the silence stretch across the room. That asset was transferred by recorded deed to his surviving child, Wyatt Dalton, on June 12, 2019. The room erupted instantly. Brenda shot out of her chair so fast her coffee cup rattled against the saucer, spilling dark liquid across the lace tablecloth. "That's a lie!" she screamed, her face draining of color until she looked like chalk. "We had a lease! We had a quitclaim signed right before he died! I own this land!" Roy stepped forward from the pantry, his hands balled into tight fists, his face mottled with ugly red rage. "You pulled some forged paper," Roy snarled, pointing a thick finger straight at Tom Beck. "That girl didn't earn a square inch of this place." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back against the floorboards with a quiet, deliberate scrape. The entire room turned to look at me. I looked straight past Brenda, past Roy's shaking hands, and right at the lawyer they had secretly hired who was now frantically flipping through a folder with wide, panicked eyes. "You can't steal what was already given away, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the shouting like a scalpel. "You spent 20 years believing your own lies, thinking you could rewrite history just by shipping a kid out in the dark. But my father wasn't stupid. He spent 20 years building a paper trail that could survive a hurricane." Detective Wyatt and the 2 county officers pushed open the front door just then, stepping into the crowded room with heavy, measured strides, their badges catching the morning light. Wyatt didn't even wait for the shouting to die down. She looked right at Roy and my mother, her voice flat and cold. "Brenda Dalton, Roy Matthews, you are under arrest for the financial exploitation of an elder and grand larceny. Step away from the table." The noise in the room collapsed into a suffocating, breathless hush. Travis dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking as the reality of what his mother and uncle had done finally broke over him like a wave. Brenda went rigid, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, her face turning a sickly shade of gray as the deputies stepped up and placed the cold steel cuffs around her wrists. Roy tried to plant his feet, tried to puff out his chest the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate someone, But one look from the deputies made him realize his reign of quiet terror in this county was over for good. They led them out through the screen door, right past the front porch where 20 years ago a frightened little girl had been told nobody wanted her. I stood by the window and watched them get loaded into the back of the cruiser, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. When the dust settled and the neighbors had all shuffled out in stunned silence, only Tom Beck and I were left in the quiet house. The smell of fresh alfalfa rolled in through the open screen door, carrying that same sweet, green scent from the fields outside. Tom handed me the heavy iron key to the front door and a manila folder containing the final clean filings of the estate. "He did it," Tom said quietly, his hand resting on my shoulder for a brief, steady moment. "He kept you safe, and he kept the land." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I walked over to the old wooden desk by the window, placed my father's green and black work flannel neatly across the back of the chair, and set my hands flat on the polished wood. For the first time in 20 years, the house didn't feel like a trap or a ghost story. It felt like home. "He didn't send me away," I repeated, my voice steady and clear across the quiet room. "He sent me out of reach." "There is a difference. And you spent 20 years making sure I never learned it." Brenda stared at me, her chest heaving, every trace of the grieving widow completely gone, replaced by a cold, venomous fury. She opened her mouth to lash out, but before a single word could escape, Detective Pouet stepped forward from the back of the room, her boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Brenda Dalton, Roy Matthews," Pouet called out, her voice cutting through the heavy tension like a blade. "You are under arrest for the financial exploitation of an elder and grand larceny. Step away from the table." Roy surged forward, his face turning an ugly mottled purple as his hands clenched into tight fists. "You have no right!" he barked, taking a threatening step toward the front. But the 2 county deputies who had slipped in behind Pouet immediately moved to block his path, their hands resting calmly on their utility belts. One look at their expression made it clear that any sudden move would be his last mistake in this county. Travis dropped his head into his hands, letting out a long, shuddering breath as the final pieces of the house of cards his mother and uncle had built finally collapsed around them. Brenda went entirely rigid, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief as the cold steel cuffs were locked securely around her wrists. As the deputies led them out through the front door and down the porch steps, the neighbors sat frozen in their folding chairs, too stunned to whisper. When the cruiser's tires crunched down the gravel driveway and faded into the distance, only Ruth, Tom Beck, the pastor, and I remained in the room. Ruth stood up from the back row, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and walked over to place a trembling, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Tom Beck closed his leather briefcase with a soft, definitive snap, pulled a manila folder from the top, and slid it across the table toward me. "The farm is yours, Wyatt," he said quietly, "and the trust is fully secured. Your father's instructions have been carried out to the letter." I picked up the heavy iron house key sitting beside the folder, feeling its cold, solid weight in my palm. The sweet, green scent of second-cutting alfalfa drifted in through the open screen door, carrying the exact same memory of the fields outside. I walked over to the old wooden desk by the window, placed my father's green and black work flannel neatly across the back of the chair, and set my hands flat on the polished wood. For the first time in 20 years, the house didn't feel like a trap or a ghost story. It felt like home. She started to change tactics the way drowning people do, coming toward me with her hands out, her voice gone sweet and shaking. "We can work this out," she said, "family to family. We'll split it fair. Just you and me. No lawyers, no police." For 1 second, I saw the frightened poor girl she must have been once, the one who swore she would never be powerless again. And I almost felt the pull of it. Then it passed. "There's no deal," I said. "There's only what's recorded." That was when Detective Pouet stepped forward from the back of the room, and the temperature changed for everyone who had come expecting a quiet country will reading. She introduced herself and her partner, calm and clear, stating that the matter before the family was not only an estate, but that there was an open investigation into the financial exploitation of Nadine Dalton, and that some present might wish to speak with their own attorneys before saying anything further. She didn't slap cuffs on anybody. Real life is slower and heavier than television. But she laid the certified bank statements on the table next to my father's deed, and she said, looking at no one in particular, that they had recently confirmed a key date with a witness who had been in the house the night the pattern began. Every head in the room understood whose date that was. My mother's mouth opened and shut. Roy was already halfway out the door, and Puit's partner went out after him unhurried. And Travis, my brother, who had spent his whole life being told who I was, pushed off the wall by the window and stood in the middle of that room to say to the neighbors, the pastor, and our mother the only words that truly mattered. She told me Wyatt stole, he said, his voice unsteady. My whole life, I never once saw any proof. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. He wasn't switching teams or asking for forgiveness, and I didn't expect him to. He was just a man who couldn't stand in his father's house and keep holding a lie that heavy. The pastor was on his feet now, the neighbors murmuring, the whole careful story my mother had spent 2 decades building coming apart in front of the only audience she had ever wanted to fool. Tom Beck closed the folder. That concludes the reading, he said. And in the silence after, with the alfalfa smell drifting in through the prop screen door and my father's name sitting on the table in black ink, I understood that I had not won anything back. You cannot win back 20 years. But the truth was finally in the room, and it was not leaving with my mother's version anymore. People always want to know how it ended in numbers. So here's what I can tell you plainly and without dressing it up. The land was mine, free and clear, and nothing my mother filed afterward changed that. She did pursue her elective share as a surviving spouse, which the law allowed her, and she got a portion of the rest, and her lawyer made it slow and expensive the way I was warned it would be. The county attorney referred Roy's case forward, and the financial exploitation matter is still grinding through the system as I tell you this, the way those things do, with no guarantees and a great deal of paper. I didn't get a tidy bow. What I got was the truth on the record and a farm I never expected to want. I stayed 2 weeks past the funeral to deal with it all. On the last evening, I walked the bottomland by myself in the long gold light. 400 acres of second-cutting alfalfa my father had moved heaven and a courthouse to keep for me. I had his green and black work flannel on over my shirt, the one Ruth pulled out of the box, and it still hung off me too big, the way his things always did. I sat on the tailgate at Shantier edge of the field and read the last page of his letter one more time, the page he wrote near the end where the pen shakes. He had signed it, your father, who never once stopped. The grief didn't lift. I don't think it ever fully will. But sitting there in his jacket on his land with his words in my lap, I was for the first time in 20 years exactly where he had always wanted me to be, home and safe. And finally knowing it, I saw my mother one last time, the morning I left, standing on that same porch where she had branded me at 11. She started to say something about family, about how I would regret cutting her off, about how I had always been ungrateful. I didn't raise my voice. You don't get to tell the story anymore, I said. The records do. And then I walked down the steps and, for the first time in my whole life, I reached back and let that screen door close behind me. The way you close a door on a room you are never going to enter again. Some people love you out loud with phone calls and birthdays and their arms around you. Mine loved me in silence, in paperwork, in 20 years of letting me hate him so that I would be far away and breathing. And I would trade every acre of that farm for one more chance to hear his screen door close gentle behind him as he came in from the field. That's my story. One strange message on a beach. A father who played the villain so I would never have to grow up beside the real one. If this reminded you that the quiet ones are so often the people quietly protecting you, go call them today, while the only letters left are not the kind a lawyer hands you across a table. Share this with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.